Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Congressman Neugebauer this morning, or this afternoon. He represents the 19th District of Texas, and he's now in his 5th term in the U.S. House of Representatives after first taking office in 2003. Congressman Neugebauer serves as chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations, a senior member of the House Agriculture Committee and the House Committee on Science and Technology. He also serves as Assistant Republican Whip in the House. Recently, Congressman Neugebauer was named Regional Chairman for the National Republican Congressional Committee, where he oversees the state of Texas in regard to candidate recruitment and communication. Prior to his service in Congress, he ran his own small business, which focused on residential construction and real estate development in Lubbock. Congressman Neugebauer graduated from Lubbock's Coronado High School and later Texas Tech University, Gonzaga. He's married to his high school sweetheart, who is a Ropesville native. Her name is Dana. Along with Congressman Neugebauer is Bryce Foster, his district director from the Lubbock office. Let's give a warm welcome to Congressman Randy Neugebauer.
I really hate standing behind the podium, so if it won't bother you, I might want to stand behind it. Thanks for allowing me to come over and hang out. And you know, one of the things that I would say to you today is that America is a lot safer because I'm in the district, and when I'm in the district, what that means is the United States Congress is in recess, and so I always say America's a lot safer. Now, this is a true story. A few years ago, I started listening. I haven't been used to giving a lot of speeches, and the good news is I'm not going to give one today. I'm just going to talk a little bit. But I've picked up a few lines, and so one of the ones that I used is a story that I told last week, and I'm going to tell this story like I told it, because this is the way I told it. And I said, you know, I really don't enjoy speaking that much, and in fact, the reason I've quit really doing very much speaking is I haven't been getting very good reviews. And because just the other day, I was over at the Rotary Club in Muleshoe, Texas, and I said I'd given what I thought was a pretty good speech. But I said, you know, so at the end, you know, sometimes you feel like I did a good job on that speech, you know. I said, just as soon as I finished, I said a little girl, Sally, had come with her parents to meet her congressman, and Sally made a beeline for me, and she came up and she stuck out her hand and she said, "Hi, Congressman," said, "My name is Sally." And she said, "I just want you to know that's the worst speech I've ever heard." And her mother was right behind her. And she came running up. She said, "Oh, Congressman," she said, "I'm sorry." She said, "You know, she's just at that age where she repeats everything she hears." So here I am in Muleshoe, Texas at the Rotary Club. But anyway, and people, it's kind of interesting. Some people will come up and say, "Where is Muleshoe, Texas?" And so I'll get an opportunity to tell them. You know, I was thinking about the 4-way test. Every time I hear the 4-way test, I think, wouldn't it be nice if Congress had to run a bill by it every time that a bill came through, that you had to run the 4-way test on it, you know, and because I think that is, I love that 4-way test. So anyway, it's great to be here, see some familiar faces and some friends, and so what I thought we'd do just for a few minutes here is I'd just kind of give you a little bit of, State of the Union message here, and then really what I really wanted to do is leave some time for you to ask some questions or make some comments, because when I'm in the back of the district, it's not to make speeches, it's to listen to the people I work for. And so I work for you, and so it's important for me to understand what's on your mind and your heart, so that when I go and represent you in our nation's house, that I'm representing your values. And obviously there's a few things that are dominating the landscape right now. Number one is the deficit. And it's not a little deficit, it's a big deficit. For the 3rd year in a row, we've run a 1.6, we've had a 1.4, now we're going to have a $1.5 trillion deficit. And so basically in the first 2.5 years of this administration, we will have doubled the national debt. For every dollar we're spending in this country today, we're borrowing 42 cents. That doesn't work in your budget at home, it doesn't work in businesses, and it doesn't work for, it's not working for our government. And so you've got a government that spends too much, borrows too much, and taxes too much. And so it's time for us to address these issues, and these aren't small issues. When you're running a $1.5 trillion deficit, and you've got a $3.5 trillion budget, you know, just cutting a little here and cutting a little there isn't going to do it. And so what we've said, we have to look at across the full spectrum and figure out a way for the federal government to handle its business like you handle yours, and that is, you see what we got into the trap here is we just started using debt as a revenue source. And so really the argument was this: how much do we want to spend? How much do we have coming in, and we'll just borrow the rest? Well, like I said, you can't do that, we can't do that. So really we have to start having the discussion, how much do we have coming in? That's how much we have to spend. And we put a discipline on ourselves not to spend more than we bring in, and so that means for you to prioritize how you spend the American taxpayers' money. And these are these are the kind of discussions we should have been having a long time ago, but certainly we're going to have them now. We're going to have them in a serious way. And we owe the American people that dialogue. We need to do it in an open and transparent way. We need to do it in an honest way. The American people need the truth. There's so many gimmicks. One of the things, you know, I went to Texas Tech University. I was an accounting major, and I've, you know, kept some books over my life and kept the books in my business. But that accounting that he used in Washington D.C. is beyond my lowest imagination. It is, and there's so many gimmicks. The only place in the world where reducing the amount you spend is a cut. In other words, if you don't give them an increase, it's a cut. Now, I don't get that. And that's the kinds of truths that the American people need to hear, because you get these folks that get up in these talking heads and they start talking about, well, they're going to cut this and they're going to cut that. And you know, in many times it's just that we're not going to give them an increase, or the increase isn't going to be as much as they want. And so we're going to have this honest dialogue to get our country back on track. And here's the reason why. How many people in this room are living a bigger, more prosperous life than your parents and your grandparents? And how many people in the room think that your children and your grandchildren are going to have the same opportunity? They're going to live a bigger, more prosperous life than you are. You see, that's the issue that's at stake. You see, that shouldn't be the answer, but unfortunately, it is the mood of the American people. They are very concerned about the future of this country. So the deficit is obviously one of those. The other concern and other issue that's dominating the landscape in D.C. right now is the feeling by the American people that the government is beginning to dominate their lives. Going to tell them what kind of health care they're going to have. You've got a huge encroachment by all of these federal agencies, whether it's the EPA or OSHA or these other agencies, and everywhere they turn, there's just huge encroachment on their lives by the federal government. And the American people aren't excited about that. They don't want the government telling them that they have to have this or they have to have that. They don't want the government taking over their health care. And so, you know, one of the things that a lot of people across the country, even after the Obamacare was passed, was, you know, what are y'all going to do to do away with that? So, you know, we've had a couple of votes to overturn that, but as long as the Senate is controlled by the Democrats and the White House is controlled by the President, he's more likely not going to sign a bill that does away with his signature piece of legislation. So we've been spending a lot of time, you know, trying to limit this growth in some of these of the government, particularly with EPA. It's been very troublesome because every time we turn around, EPA's got a new regulation, or we've got the Fish and Wildlife trying to make lizards and chickens and all of these kind of things, you know, endangered and impacting the way you can use your land. And I always tell those folks from EPA and Fish and Wildlife to be real careful when you go out to West Texas and start telling folks that they can't use their land, and you better be packing. Because we're kind of sensitive about our property rights out here. And really, American people are sensitive about their property rights. And they become offended when the government starts telling them, you know, that they have to fence off and they can't do this in this area. Has anybody ever tasted a lesser prairie chicken? I don't know what But, so, there's this feeling, you know, that the government is just encroaching more and more on people's lives. And then, you know, from a national security perspective, obviously, you know, we've been kind of watching what's going on around the world, and particularly the Middle East has become even more unstable than it was. And one of the things that, you know, concerns a lot of us is, you know, what does that mean? Particularly for a nation that's, you know, gets up every morning and 70% of its oil has to come from places around the world that aren't all that stable and aren't all that friendly towards our country. Country that has to import 10 to 15% of its gasoline because we let the environmental people keep us from building our own refineries and developing our own oil and gas reserves. And so from a security standpoint, and obviously it was a big day for our country when we got bin Laden. But you know, one of the things I have to say is that I've had a classified briefing, I've heard what you've heard, and you know, what a fine group of young men, this SEAL team that went in there, and the way that mission went and the outcome is truly a miracle. And I'm hoping someday I'm sure there will be a movie about that, and hopefully more details can be released. But it was a great day. But you know, and as I said to a number of the news media folks, you know, let's celebrate this day. Always good to stop and celebrate your victories. But you know, the war on terrorism still continues, and every day that we have men and women that are defending our freedom and democracy in a lot of different capacities, and freedom, and that freedom and liberty is at risk every day. And so one of the things that we learned about that operation is we learned 2 or 3 things. One, interrogating those prisoners down in Guantanamo is a good thing. That's where we got a lot of the intel from that. Secondly, that in having a very robust intelligence network is extremely important on the war on terrorism. You know, in other wars, some of you may have fought, you knew where the playing field was. You knew where the war was going to be. The war on terrorism is fought globally. It can be fought in Muleshoe, Texas. I mean, who would have thought we had a guy building bombs in Lubbock, Texas? And I always say if it can happen in Lubbock, Texas, you know, it can happen anywhere in the world. So having a robust intelligence opportunity is extremely important in keeping you safe on a daily basis. And I think the third thing too that points out is that the way we're going to have to fight this war on terrorism, you know, the special ops people have and continue to play a huge role in that. And the technology that we're going to have to bring into our military to keep that robust opportunity to fight the war on terrorism is going to be important. And so as we're trying to reshuffle the deck on how we spend our money, obviously we'll have to look at the military budget as well and make sure that we're keeping the technology that we need. But a lot of our technology, quite honestly, when we're flying, we got airplanes that young pilots are flying that are twice as old as the pilots. When a young man is flying a B-52, he's probably flying a plane that's at least 2 times how old as he is. And so we've got some work to do in that area. A lot of people ask me about Afghanistan and Pakistan. I've been to both Afghanistan and Pakistan, and I've had briefings. And you know, the problem with Pakistan and Afghanistan is you can't separate them. You can't say, you know, we're not going to play in Pakistan or we're not going to play in Afghanistan. We actually have to play there. Obviously, I'm not a big fan of Mr. Karzai, who's the leader of Afghanistan. You know, I'm a West Texas guy, pretty well size you up the first time I meet you. And the first time I met him, I was not impressed, but he is the president of that country. Our mission there is to make sure that that country does not become a training field for terrorists in the future. It's a different mission, I think, quite honestly, than our mission in Iraq. In Iraq, I think we had an opportunity there to change the face of that country for a while. We'll see how history plays out. Afghanistan is a much more complicated, difficult country. People have been fighting in that country for centuries. But the Pakistan piece of it is as long as if the Pakistan, if we don't have some kind of a relationship with Pakistan, what can happen is that these organizations can do business in Afghanistan and then run back to Pakistan. And we've told the Pakistanis, I mean, they're throwing up this big fight and stuff like that, but we told them from the very beginning, if he's in your country and you're not doing something about it, we're going to do something about it. We tell them that not just about him, but we tell them that about other folks. And so we've been flying drones in there, for a long time. It just became public a couple of years ago. And it's been a very effective tool for us. But we can't allow for Pakistan to be a kind of a nest, hornet's nest. The hornets come in there and sting everybody and then come back to the nest in that country. And so how all this plays out, we'll have to see. The President's going to have to step up and be very aggressive with the Pakistanis. And going to have to be, I think, we've sent them a lot of money. And I think if they don't give us the tail rotor back on that helicopter, and if it'll do some other things, I think we ought to cut them off. So I think we're to the point with some of these countries, we've been trying to buy friendship. And I think we have to rethink that, because number one, we don't have the resources to continue to do that. And secondly, I'm not sure that's necessarily the best strategy. I think sometimes just having a good, strong friend or partner is good. Your partner doesn't necessarily have to be giving you money, but what happens is I'm not sure we have control over how a lot of that money is being spent, and I question sometimes whether we're actually doing more harm than good with some of that. So those are issues that are kind of, I think, dominating the landscape right now. Obviously, other issues. But what I'd really like to do is just have a little family discussion here and address some of the issues that maybe are on your mind. I know this is not a bashful group, because Doc?
Just mentioned foreign aid. My question is, the government is asking the domestic policy to be reduced in some areas to help save money for the budget, but I don't hear any comments in the area of foreign aid. If you're going to cut some domestic programs, how about scale back foreign aid?
And I think you're exactly right, and I think that is on the table. I think it's hard for me to ask the American people to go through the kind of sacrifices I think we're going to have to work through this. If we're and it's hard to justify that we're not making some strategic cuts in our foreign money we're spending for foreign aid, and so I think that has to be a part of the landscape. I think we can't take anything off the table, and as I said, I'm not sure that as I listen to the briefings and stuff that I've had, sometimes I leave those briefings wondering, I'm not sure how that is in our best interest, and that's the only interest I represent. And just as a side note, this is going around the world apologizing to people. We don't owe anybody an apology. The only thing we ever do for countries is we leave a lot of young men and women's blood on those countries, and so our policy shouldn't be to undermine or to apologize for America. We have a lot to be proud of, and those folks are lucky that we are their friends.
Congressman, in all the debt reduction and everything that's being looked at in Washington, I would encourage you, and by the way, your response from Bryce and your Lubbock office and your response to some telecommunications issues, I certainly appreciate. It's been very helpful. I would encourage you to, I know you take care of the rural communities, but there's some issues at the FCC right now that I certainly would appreciate you keeping an eye on. Some of the initiatives that have come out of the FCC at this point would have the possibility of closing up to maybe around 400 telephone companies in the United States. And what they haven't really figured out is they need rural America. And we need to be able to push communications and broadband in rural America. If our dairy people don't have communications or broadband communications and downtown Chicago runs out of milk, I think we know what's going to happen. So what I encourage you to, your colleagues up there, to keep them ever mindful of the rural communities.
Absolutely, and I think it is so important, a lot of the issues that we're facing right now have a huge impact, particularly on rural America. And so, obviously, having the district I have is, gets my attention. Infrastructure is an important part. In other words, we've been talking at this table a little bit about, starting to see some young people actually come back to our rural communities. The only way they can do that is if there's jobs and opportunity there. But with broadband and some other types of infrastructure there, it changes the way we all work. It removes some of the barriers of having to live in a particular location and provides opportunities to do that. And so we certainly have to do that because, while our kids may want to come back and live in our communities, if we don't have an opportunity for them to be able to do that, then it's not going to happen. So broadband, transportation, all of those important school systems, making sure we have them. What a great facility. In Muleshoe High School, I was in that building and kind of wandering around. That's an important piece of that. Having a good building, having good teachers, having a good, strong school system is important. Medical community, if we're not able to preserve rural America to have, people that live in rural America to have access, reasonable access to health care, people are not going to live where they can't access health care. And so we have to make sure, and that's one of the reasons about this model, this Obamacare, is that when you look at that model, it is not friendly to rural America. And so though all of those things have a huge impact on the future of this country, but particularly a lot of these things that are being discussed, can have an impact on rural America. And so it's my job, to make sure that as we look at this policy, we look at how we're going to reallocate the money to make sure that we all take equally the pain and the cuts and the reductions that we're going to have to take, but at the same time, not diminishing the ability of those communities to continue to be. And it's going to be impactful because what happens is because the federal government has been doling out a lot of money that it didn't have. It's been giving that money to states, it's been giving that money to, in some cases, to school districts and to communities. As those monies diminish, just out of necessity, it's going to require, and it's going to have a trickle-down effect, and it's going to require states and local governments and everything to come up with a different model. But long-term, I think it's better. You don't have to worry about all the red tape of how you're going to do that. Now, what we have to do is make sure that that we don't let the government diminish the amounts of money it's passing out, but then increase the amount of money it's taking out of the economy. And that's the reason I'm not supporting any tax increases at this particular point in time. Now, how many people in here think the federal government tax is too little? How many think it's too much? Yeah, I mean, but thank you for that. We look forward to working with you on that.
Other Randy?
Yes, sir.
What is your game plan when the debate on raising the debt ceiling starts? What do you hope to accomplish? What do you hope to get out of it long-term, balanced budget-wise?
Yeah, I think we've been having some meetings about that. I was in one on Thursday before I came back to Texas on Friday. I think it was Friday I came back. It's kind of lose track. But, it has to be big. It has to be game-changing. Doing business as usual is not going to do that. Certainly a balanced budget amendment would be a good thing to have, but it can't be the only thing because that will take, that's you're going to have to pass that in both the House and the Senate. I'm not sure you can pass it in the Senate, and then it'd have to be ratified, by 3/4 of the state. But I think that's the kind of things that have to be put in there because you're going to have to change the institution. Because right now it's too easy to push the easy button. You can either increase taxes or you can borrow more money. Well, what we ought to do is begin to put a ceiling on how much money you can borrow and put a ceiling on how much money you can spend. And so then that puts all of the emphasis on reducing the government spending. If you give government more revenue, it will spend it. Just like my wife, if I give her more money, she will spend it on those grandkids every time. So I think we're looking at how we can look at spending caps, how we can look at, you know, putting some restrictions where it forces not only this Congress, but future Congresses into a plan where we quit using debt as a revenue source and we start pushing future Congresses towards balancing the budget.
Do you think we've got enough time to do that gradually, though?
Well, I think that's a race. We're in a race with the bond markets. Is right now our debt is 50% of our debt is held by foreign countries, and we've had, you know, PIMCO is which one of the largest, you know, bond investors in the country. It's sold all they're selling all of their U.S. Treasury positions. Other people are buying some Treasury positions, but I believe the world. I mean, with the Standard & Poor's the other day said, hey, your credit is tarnished. And at some point in time, we're the world's reserve currency, but at some point in time, the Chinese are already trying to figure out a way to hold less of our dollars and to hold other currencies because they're concerned about all these dollars that they're holding for two reasons. One, whether they'll get them back, and secondly, the value level. And so what they're seeing is we're sitting here holding dollars. They didn't used to worry about getting their money back, but they have been concerned about, you know, the fact that, you know, dollars are depreciating. It's putting some real pressure on their currency because it's created somewhat of an inflationary environment in their country. So, but we do know that they're opening up ways for other people to hold their currency rather than trading in dollars. I asked Chairman Bernanke one day, I said, what would happen if one day Venezuela or one of these countries that's sending us oil said, we want to settle in gold. We won't take dollars anymore. He really didn't have a good answer to that, but the gist of it was it would not be a good day. You know, and so I think the urgency of these big decisions is great, and we've kicked this can down the road so long that you know it's going to be a bumpy road to get there. But we really can't afford not to. Is by the fact that a little survey we took a while ago, people are worried about the future of this country.
You mentioned the EPA, and then you another issue with property rights is water. What do you see as our big issue with property rights going forward?
Well, obviously, you know, the founders were pretty sensitive to property rights, and I know that the state legislature has been doing some things with trying to clarify what everybody's rights on that. But your property rights are under attack in almost a lot of different areas. I mean, EPA is certainly one of those areas where you know, trying to limit the kinds of activities that can take place on your property limits your opportunity, limits the use and value of your property. And so what I get really concerned about is this federalism that's creeping in everywhere. And one of the last things we want is the federal government coming in and regulating the water rights for our country. I think those are issues I think that are being discussed in the right venue, and that is at the state level, because you don't want the federal government coming in. There was a couple of years ago, there was looked like an innocuous bill, and everybody was about to sign on to it. It was the federal government was going to study some aquifers. And I looked at the bill and I said, and I voted against it. In fact, worked to defeat it. It was an amendment. Because when you know government's coming is when they start studying stuff, because the ultimate result of every study is the government needs to do something. So when people say we're going to study something, that means we're fixing to come in there and regulate something, and we just want to know exactly more about what we're about to regulate. So I think you have to kind of watch, you know, this, and it's, some of it's not just a gradual creep. I mean, some of it is leaping into the lives of American people. And every time that the legislation is passed, it erodes our liberties and our freedoms. Yes, sir.
Muleshoe and Lubbock and the whole High Plains area and the low rolling plains as well are very dependent on agriculture.
Yes, sir.
Could you just comment on agriculture policy?
Yes, I mean, we got a farm bill coming up next year in 2012. And we're obviously going to be, depending on what the economic environment is, will kind of determine what the budget numbers look like. We're hopeful that the economy's picking up a little bit. Quite honestly, the bright shining star in America in the last year or two has been agriculture. Farm income, I think, is just going to set a record, for this current year. So we're going to be looking at a farm bill that will be probably, riding with using reduced resources of the environment that we wrote the farm bill the last time. So one of the things I think it'll cause us to do is begin to prioritize, look at these different programs and ascertain what mix of them and configured in what way bring the best safety net, to make sure that we're not also getting up every day and trying to figure out how some foreign country is going to feed us as well. So I think obviously we'll have to, just kind of see how that plays out. But one of the things that I think I'm trying to remind some of my colleagues is when you look at that $300 billion number, some of these programs out there that, particularly with the farm program, most of that's food stamps and nutrition programs, and really has very little to do with a farm program, with production agriculture. And so, I've thought a few times while I've been up there that maybe we ought to separate those two. But then people say, some people vote for the farm bill not because it's got the production agriculture in there, but they vote for it because it's got the food stamps in it. So it's a dilemma. But what we need to do is make sure that agriculture doesn't take a disproportionate share of the reductions. I think people in agriculture understand that we got to get our financial household in order, but they also understand that we have to have until we can make the playing field level around the world, that we have to make sure that we don't lose that agriculture infrastructure because the rest of the world's not playing on a level playing field with us.
I heard the statistic that the farm bill, only 0.5% actually go to production agriculture. Have you heard that?
Well, that's of the entire budget. I think the production agriculture is about 0.5% of the total federal budget. It's about 20% or less than 20% of the total farm bill allocation. Well, I think I'm getting the signal. I'm about to change locations. I've probably got time for one more question.
I was just going to ask, the concern that I have, or should it even be a concern, that we're up on a farm bill and they're going to go over all the programs that have to do with anything with farming, and it happens to fall on two of the highest commodity prices years back to back that we've ever had. And I'm afraid they're going to take a snapshot of 2010 and 2011 and then try to base the farm bill partially off of that. And really, that is not an overall picture of the income for farming.
Yeah, we're going to have to do. Yeah, you're exactly right. And of course, for example, counter-cyclical payments. I guess for probably the last 2 years there haven't been any counter-cyclical payments. But what I think we have to use that as an example of how, if you put the right program in place, it works. It comes in when it's needed, but when it's not needed, And my guess is that of all the programs that over the last 5 years, that's actually probably come in many ways, in some areas, less than what it was projected to cost. Some of these farm programs actually are going to come in a little bit less. Well, listen, thanks for letting me stop by and visit. I've enjoyed my time here. And let me just close by saying, what an honor and privilege it is that you've given me to represent you in the United States Congress. And I know that it's a tremendous responsibility. I do not take it lightly. We get up every day and we go long hours every day to make sure that you have good representation that you deserve. But thank you for the honor and privilege you give me. And so God bless you and God bless the United States of America. Okay, stand adjourned. Have a good week.